What if a prisoner's final wish before execution wasn't to see his family, but a dog? In the last 24 hours of his life, Robert Carter, a man convicted of murder, makes a strange and haunting request: to meet Shadow, the retired prison dog who once stopped him from taking his own life behind bars. What starts as a simple farewell soon unravels into something far more sinister. As the clock ticks down, secrets emerge, loyalties are tested, and a buried truth begins to surface. Could it be that Robert isn't the monster the world believes he is? And if so, who is? Robert Carter, once a respected firefighter known for saving lives, now sits alone in a dimly lit prison cell, his hands resting heavily on his lap as the cold concrete walls seem to close in around him. The clock on the wall ticks louder than usual. It's a reminder that he has less than 24 hours left to live. He has been sentenced to death for the murder of a wealthy real estate developer, a crime he has always claimed he did not commit. Over the 6 long years since his arrest, Robert has endured isolation, humiliation, and despair, but through it all, he never stopped hoping that the truth would one day come to light. His once strong shoulders are now slouched, burdened by the weight of injustice and time. Yet, even as the final hours approach, Robert refuses to reach out to his estranged family or ask for religious comfort. Instead, he makes a quiet, unusual request that confuses the prison guards. He wants to see Shadow, an aging German shepherd who once served as the prison's canine unit. Years ago, when Robert was at his lowest, ready to end his life with a shard of broken glass, Shadow found him in time. The dog didn't bark or bite, he simply lay beside Robert, pressing his head into Robert's chest as if to say, "You're not alone." That silent comfort saved Robert's life, and now, in these final hours, all he wants is to see that dog one last time. It's not just about saying goodbye, it's about facing death with the only soul who ever truly believed in his innocence. As the minutes stretch into what feels like an eternity, Robert sits motionless, the weight of his situation pressing down on him like an invisible force. His cell feels smaller, suffocating in its silence. He can't seem to shake the cold feeling creeping through his chest, a quiet dread that has become his constant companion. The door to his cell creaks open, the sound sharp and unnatural against the silence. Through the crack, a familiar scent lingers, something earthy and comforting that pulls at his very core. It's the scent of Shadow. At first, Robert doesn't move. His mind races, heart pounding harder than it should. The guards, usually so indifferent, seem to step back, their stance softening as a shadow fills the doorway. Robert doesn't need to see the animal's face to know who it is. He knows that presence, larger than life, stronger than any of the prison walls that have surrounded him for so long. Then, Shadow steps fully into the room. His coat, once sleek and vibrant, has faded, the gray hairs on his muzzle betraying the years that have passed. Shadow's movements are slower now, almost cautious, but there's no mistaking the fire still alive in his dark eyes. Robert blinks hard, and for the briefest moment, the world outside the prison walls vanishes. It's just him and the dog. Nothing else matters. The tremor in Robert's hands is almost imperceptible, but he can feel it, his fingers curling into fists, then relaxing, unsure of how to act. The steady rhythm of his heart hammers in his chest as he watches Shadow come closer, his tail swaying weakly, but still there. Still a sign of life. The dog's steps are deliberate, as though he's savoring every second, as if he knows how precious these moments are. With each step, Robert's heart loosens a little. The weight of all his regrets, his fears, and the looming uncertainty of his fate begin to feel just a little lighter. When Shadow reaches him, Robert doesn't wait. He drops to his knees, the rough concrete digging into his skin, but he doesn't care. Shadow nudges his head against Robert's hand, a gentle, familiar gesture that carries more meaning than any words could express. Robert's breath hitches. It's been years since he's allowed himself to truly feel anything. His walls, his defenses, have been so solid for so long, built out of survival and fear. But now, in the presence of this dog, the one constant in his life, those walls begin to crumble. Tears sting at the corners of Robert's eyes, but he fights them back, feeling a strange mix of guilt and relief. He strokes Shadow's fur, slow and careful, as though he's afraid that if he moves too fast, this moment will slip away, like sand through his fingers. His voice is barely a whisper, thick with emotion. "You're still here. After everything, you're still here with me." The dog responds with a soft whine, his head pressing more firmly against Robert's hand, as if to say, "I'm here, and I never left." The simplicity of it, Shadow's loyalty, his unwavering devotion, cuts through Robert's soul. For the first time in years, he feels something real. It's as if the presence of this dog, the one creature who had never doubted him, is all he needs to feel human again. In the silence that follows, Robert's mind swirls with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. He knows that Shadow is here because, in some way, this is the end. But instead of the crushing despair he once feared, there's a small flicker of peace in his chest. A peace he never thought he would find behind these prison walls. As he gazes down at Shadow, he feels a deep ache in his heart, an ache of something lost, something unfinished. But also, the comfort of knowing that, even in the darkest times, he had this bond. A bond that, in the end, was unbroken. The seconds stretch into what feels like a lifetime as Robert sits still, his heart pounding in his chest. Shadow, the dog he had once trained, the dog who had been his companion in so many of life's darkest moments, lies beside him, his warm body pressed against Robert's leg. The scent of the familiar fur, the soft rhythmic breathing of the dog, it all feels so surreal in this sterile, concrete world of the prison. Here, within these gray walls, Robert has lived a life that's slowly eroded his sense of time, his sense of self. Yet, as he feels the weight of Shadow's head in his lap, there's a flicker of something that has been long forgotten, a spark of warmth, a connection that was never truly lost, just buried under layers of regret and loneliness. Robert's fingers tremble as they gently run through the dog's coarse fur. It's a gesture that feels both comforting and heartbreaking. He hadn't allowed himself to think about this moment, not truly. The truth was too painful, too overwhelming. He had spent so many years pushing away everything that reminded him of the life he once had, the life he threw away, including Shadow. His eyes briefly close as memories flood in, the nights they spent patrolling the streets, the quiet companionship, the sense of purpose Shadow had brought him. It was all so easy to take for granted back then, to believe that nothing could ever tear them apart. But life, as it often does, had other plans. The guilt swells up inside Robert, choking him. He hadn't been there when Shadow needed him most. He had abandoned his loyal companion, just as he had abandoned so much else in his life. His fingers stop moving, resting gently on the dog's side as he fights back the surge of emotions threatening to overtake him. This wasn't supposed to be how it ended. Not like this. Not in a prison, surrounded by the consequences of his own failures, with nothing but the quiet sounds of a dog's breathing and the faint whispers of memories that now feel like a distant dream. But Shadow had found him. And that, more than anything else, left Robert feeling utterly lost. How could he make sense of this? How could he deserve this kindness? His throat tightens as the weight of that question settles like a heavy stone in his chest. He had pushed people away. He had failed his family, his friends, and now, even his dog. And yet, here Shadow was, offering him a simple, silent grace that spoke louder than any apology could. Robert's heart aches, his body shaking with the force of his sorrow. His gaze moves downward, meeting Shadow's eyes, those deep, soulful eyes that once seemed to understand everything without a word being spoken. Shadow looks up at him now, unwavering, as if knowing this moment is fleeting. It's in the way the dog's ears perk up ever so slightly, the way his eyes seem to gleam with a silent wisdom. There is no resentment in those eyes. There is no anger. Only a quiet acceptance. A bond forged through years of trust, unspoken but unbroken. Robert feels a tear slip down his cheek before he can stop it, the saltiness of it almost like a physical release, as if the floodgates have finally opened after years of keeping everything locked inside. "I never meant for it to be this way," Robert whispers, his voice breaking with emotion. "I didn't mean to lose you." The words feel foreign on his tongue, like an apology he's been too afraid to say. But now, with Shadow beside him, there's no point in holding it in anymore. There's no more room for pride, for excuses. Shadow's soft breathing fills the silence that stretches between them, and Robert's hand instinctively moves to rest on the dog's back, his palm flat against the warm fur. For a long moment, they simply sit there, existing together in a space that seems to transcend time itself. The harsh lights of the prison are a world away from the warmth that has wrapped itself around Robert and Shadow in this quiet, private moment. For the first time in a long while, Robert feels a flicker of peace. Not because everything is okay, he knows it's not. Not because the past can be undone. But because, for once, he doesn't feel completely alone. "I don't know what comes next, Shadow," Robert murmurs, his voice barely audible. "But I won't forget you. I swear, I won't." The promise hangs in the air, and though he knows words can't fix everything, it feels like a small step toward redemption, toward reconciliation. In this place of confinement, where everything is designed to break you down, Robert realizes that this moment, this quiet exchange of love and regret, might just be the only thing that keeps him from losing himself entirely. And as Shadow shifts slightly, resting his head against Robert's knee, the two of them sit in the calm of the moment, both knowing the end is near. Not just for Shadow, but for them both. But in this fleeting instant, with the dog's presence grounding him, Robert feels something like hope, a strange, fragile hope that perhaps even in the darkest places, some bonds remain unbroken. Robert sat still on the cold, hard floor of his prison cell, his back pressed against the unforgiving concrete walls. His posture was hunched, the muscles in his shoulders stiff from hours of sitting in one position. The dim light from the small window above barely reached him, casting long shadows across the room, making the space feel even smaller, more suffocating. But none of this mattered. Nothing mattered except for the presence of the dog at his side. Shadow lay there, his thick coat of fur warm and comforting against Robert's outstretched hand. The dog's breathing was slow and steady, but Robert could feel the subtle tremors in his body, as if even Shadow knew the truth, that their time together was running out. Robert's fingers brushed through Shadow's fur absent-mindedly, the motion automatic, as though this simple act was the only thing that could keep him grounded. His heart ached as he gently stroked the dog's back, his thoughts spiraling into a mess of guilt and regret. He had never imagined that his life would come to this, trapped in a concrete box, reflecting on all the mistakes he had made, all the people he had let down, and the one constant companion who had stood by him no matter what. Shadow had never once turned his back on him. The loyalty in those golden eyes had been unwavering, and now, as Robert's heart weighed heavy with sorrow, he couldn't help but wonder if he had ever truly deserved it. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the faint sounds of the prison, distant shouts, the clink of metal, the murmurs of other inmates that seemed so far removed from him now. Everything felt distant, surreal. The world outside continued, oblivious to the small, painful reality within these four walls. Robert's grip tightened slightly around Shadow's fur as the weight of everything he had lost, everything he couldn't undo, began to press down on him. His chest felt tight, the air growing heavier with each passing second. Shadow stirred slightly, his head lifting just enough to meet Robert's gaze. There was something about the way the dog looked at him in that moment, something that was almost knowing. As though Shadow understood the truth, as though he could feel the same sorrow, the same fear that Robert was trying to suppress. Robert's throat tightened as he locked eyes with the dog, fighting back the wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. He could see the fading spark in Shadow's eyes, a quiet recognition that their time together was coming to a close, and it shattered something inside Robert. A strangled sob escaped him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to feel it all. The sorrow. The guilt. The helplessness. He had always tried to be strong, to keep his emotions at bay, but now, with Shadow beside him, the walls he had built around himself began to crumble. He had never known how much he needed this dog, how much he needed this unconditional, silent companionship. But now it was too late. He had taken it all for granted, thinking he had more time, thinking he could make things right. But time was running out, and the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. "I'm sorry," Robert whispered hoarsely, his voice thick with emotion. The words were barely audible, lost in the stillness of the room. "I'm so sorry, Shadow. For everything. For not being better, for not being there when you needed me." His words trailed off as a sob broke through, raw and unfiltered. His hands, trembling, reached out to pull Shadow closer, clutching the dog's body tightly against his chest. The warm, steady heartbeat beneath his fingertips was a comfort, a reminder that, in some small way, he wasn't completely alone. But the crushing reality of the situation wouldn't let him escape. Shadow was fading, slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Shadow nuzzled against him, his body warm and familiar, but there was a frailty to him now, a softness that hadn't been there before. Robert held him tighter, his fingers curling into the dog's fur, feeling the tremors of his breath, the slow, shallow rise and fall of his chest. Tears streamed down Robert's face, unbidden and relentless. He could taste the salt on his lips as they fell, one after another, until they soaked into the dog's fur. "I don't know what I'll do without you," Robert choked out, his voice barely more than a whisper. His heart felt like it was breaking with every word. How could he say goodbye to the one constant in his life, the one who had been there through everything? How could he possibly let go of the dog who had been his anchor, his only friend, his only companion? The thought of facing the world without Shadow at his side seemed unbearable. But Shadow, as if sensing the depth of Robert's despair, shifted slightly, his head nuzzling closer into the crook of Robert's arm, as though offering comfort. There was something in those eyes, something that spoke louder than words. It wasn't time for regrets or apologies. It wasn't time for Robert to drown in guilt. What mattered was the bond they shared, the silent promise between them. Shadow had been with him through the darkest of days, and now, in this final moment, Robert knew he could offer the same devotion back. "You've been my everything," Robert whispered again, this time with more resolve. "And I'll carry you with me, always." The tears slowed, and though Robert's heart was still heavy, he knew he had to accept this. There were no more chances, no more time for regret. All he could do now was treasure these final moments with Shadow. The dog was with him. And that, in this small corner of the world, was enough. The silence in the room was overwhelming, thick with the weight of what was happening. Robert sat on the cold floor, his back pressed against the wall as he cradled Shadow in his arms, his body numb to the world around him. The once vibrant, energetic dog, his loyal companion for years, now felt like a fragile, lifeless weight in his hands. Every shallow breath that Shadow took seemed to echo in the quiet space, and Robert could hear the faintest of heartbeats, each one weaker than the last. His throat tightened as he fought to control the tears threatening to spill. Time seemed to stretch, the minutes slipping by in slow motion, each one dragging on like an eternity. Robert's mind raced, but no matter how hard he tried to focus, it was impossible to think of anything other than the dog resting in his lap. Shadow had always been there for him, through thick and thin, through moments of triumph and loss. The idea of losing him felt like losing a piece of himself, something irreplaceable. Shadow had been his protector, his constant, his unshakable anchor when everything else in his life had been uncertain. But now, as he held the dog close, he was struck with the brutal truth: this was the end. His hands trembled, fingers lightly brushing over Shadow's fur, as if by touching him, he could somehow rewind the clock. The warmth he once felt beneath his fingers was now fading, his dog's once lively coat now lifeless and cold. Robert closed his eyes, trying to hold on to the memory of what it felt like when Shadow had been healthy, when they used to run together in the park, or when the dog would curl up next to him at the end of a long day, offering nothing but companionship and trust. It all seemed so distant now. "Come on, Shadow," Robert whispered, his voice raw and desperate. "You fought so hard, just hold on a little longer. Please." The words felt empty, like they couldn't possibly hold enough weight to change what was happening. He knew it was futile, but he couldn't bring himself to give up just yet. The thought of losing the one creature who had never judged him, who had always been by his side no matter the circumstances, felt unbearable. How could he let go? The air in the room seemed to close in around him, suffocating him with its quiet presence. Robert's chest ached with a sharp, empty pain. His mind flickered to the years they had spent together. Shadow had been there for him in his darkest hours, had listened to him without ever needing words. He had been there during the sleepless nights, during the moments of doubt, always offering a comforting presence with just a nudge or a paw on his lap. Shadow had saved him more times than Robert could count, had been the one thing that never wavered, the one constant in a world that had often felt unpredictable and cruel. But now, the dog lay motionless in his arms, and Robert felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. The bond they had shared, the quiet understanding, the silent conversations through looks and gestures, seemed to be slipping through his fingers like sand. Shadow's breathing grew more labored, slower, and Robert could feel the change. He could feel the life ebbing from the dog's body, a sensation that made his stomach churn with a mix of fear and grief. He didn't know how to be strong in this moment. He didn't know how to accept that this was the end. As the final moments drew closer, Robert's mind started to drift, his thoughts disjointed and frantic. He remembered the first time they had met, how small and timid Shadow had been as a puppy, unsure of the world around him. But in that moment, Robert had known. He had known that Shadow was meant to be by his side. The dog had grown into more than just a pet. He had become Robert's closest friend, his confidant. They had shared so much together, joy, sadness, victories, losses, and now it felt like all of it was fading away, lost in the quiet of the room. "I'm so sorry," Robert whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have been better. I should have done more. I should have. I should have." His words faltered, the weight of regret pressing down on him. Why hadn't he spent more time with him? Why hadn't he been more present? He had taken it all for granted, the walks, the games, the companionship, and now, it was too late. Shadow wasn't going to wake up. Shadow wasn't going to rise from this and run again. Robert was losing him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Suddenly, Shadow let out a soft whine, a sound so faint, so barely audible, that for a moment, Robert wasn't sure if he had imagined it. His heart leaped, but before he could process what had happened, the dog's breathing faltered. It was the final sign. Shadow's pulse slowed to a stop, the faint thudding that had remained so steady in Robert's chest for so many years, now absent. Robert felt a deep, hollow ache settle in his stomach, like a heavy weight had dropped into the pit of his soul. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, Shadow was gone. The dog, the one constant source of love and loyalty in his life, was no longer there. The pain was visceral, sharp, cutting through him. He held the dog tighter, trying to keep the warmth of him close, to feel anything, but there was nothing left. Shadow's body was cold and still, and in that moment, Robert knew that he had truly lost him. Tears flooded his eyes, hot and relentless, spilling down his cheeks without his consent. He had always prided himself on his control, on his ability to keep his emotions in check, but this was too much. Shadow had meant everything to him. He had been more than just a pet, he had been family, a protector, a piece of Robert's heart that he didn't even realize was so vital until it was gone. He buried his face in the dog's fur, choking on the sobs that racked his body. But even as the grief threatened to overwhelm him, a flicker of something else began to rise within him, something stronger, something more resolute. Robert knew that he couldn't let this loss be the end. Shadow's memory, his legacy, had to live on. The love that they had shared was not something that could be taken away by death. It was something that would always be with him, carved into his heart forever. With trembling hands, Robert gently laid Shadow down, as if the dog were simply resting. He gave one final kiss to the top of the dog's head, whispering a quiet thank you through the tears. Then, with a deep, shaky breath, he stood up. The pain would never leave him, but Robert knew what he had to do now. He would honor Shadow's memory. He would carry the dog's love with him and make sure that it never faded. With one last look at the lifeless form of his beloved companion, Robert stepped into the world outside. The emptiness inside him remained, but a part of him, deep in his soul, knew that this wasn't the end. Shadow would live on in the choices Robert made, in the person he became, and in the love he would continue to give to those who needed it most. In the final seconds before death, a single phone call shatters everything. Robert Carter escapes execution, but not justice. While he walks free, questions still echo in the minds of those who witnessed his final hours. Who really committed the crime? And why was the truth buried for so long? In the end, justice may have found its way, but the shadows still hold secrets, and some stories are never truly over.